Imagine a scenario where the world teeters on the brink, nations starving, not for food, but for resources. Beneath the Arctic's icy surface lies a treasure trove of untapped oil, gas, and minerals, riches that could fuel the next century. As the ice melts, the tension heats up, cooperation breaks down, militaries mobilize, and suddenly, war games start to feel a little too real. The Arctic is shaping up to be the next big battleground, and one wrong move could spark a global catastrophe. But don't worry, that's just the plot of Naval War Arctic Circle, a Norwegian-made video game that imagines what might happen if diplomacy collapses and the Arctic becomes the center of world conflict. We usually think a NATO-Russia war would start in Ukraine or the Baltics, but what if the first shots are fired way up north, in the icy wilderness of the frozen Arctic Svalbard archipelago?
On a frozen, windswept expanse in the Arctic, Vladimir Putin's military ambition is on grand display.
Russia is pushing rapidly into the region with aims to control it before anyone else.
High Arctic on high alert. In Russia's neighbour Norway, it looks like NATO is ready for action.
But why Svalbard? Well, beyond its location, its unique legal status makes it so important. Thanks to the 1920 Svalbard Treaty, Russia can legally exploit resources and conduct research there, giving them a foothold in NATO territory. Recently, Norwegian broadcaster NRK made waves by revealing that Russian military intelligence, specifically the GRU, has been operating in Barentsburg. They linked Consul Andrei Kemerilo to Russia's military intelligence, but let's be real, this isn't breaking news. Norwegian authorities have known about Russian activity on Svalbard for years, and both Norway and Russia have been open about their strategic interests in the high north. Even Governor Lars Fauser confirmed the region is well monitored, with local authorities trained for any eventuality. More mysteriously though, Andrei Yekunin, son of a Putin ally, was recently arrested for flying a drone over Svalbard, a restricted area under Norwegian sanctions. Despite holding both Russian and British passports, Yekunin was found with his Russian passport aboard his yacht, Firebird. Authorities are investigating the seized drones and electronics despite Yekunin feigning ignorance of the law. This follows a string of Russian nationals being detained as Norway tightens security around key energy installations.
Russian warships and fighters passing through sensitive waters between Norway and Scotland. The concern, Russia could one day attack the internet and energy pipeline.
Adding fuel to the fire, fiber optic cables linking Svalbard to mainland Norway were mysteriously severed, raising suspicions about Russian covert operations. Is this just the beginning of rising Arctic tensions? Moscow has already poured resources into militarizing the Arctic, reviving 50 Soviet-era bases and deploying troops. The Arctic Trefoil Base, visited by President Vladimir Putin, is a permanent installation in Franz Josef Land, the next archipelago along from Svalbard. It's designed to house 150 personnel in extreme temperatures as low as -40°C. It's one of several military bases being built by Russia in the Arctic, alongside facilities like Northern Clover on Koletny Island and another airstrip in Franz Josef Land. Russia's Arctic military power boasts 11 nuclear-armed submarines, with 8 stationed right in the Arctic, central to Russia's global nuclear strategy. Russia also dominates the icebreaker game, with 7 nuclear-powered and 30 diesel-powered vessels. Compare that to just 2 for the US, giving Russia year-round access to the Northern Sea route. Its northern fleet consists of 26 submarines, 10 large surface ships, and various patrol vessels, while its air forces operate advanced fighter jets and bombers. Russia's Arctic strategy revolves around what's known as the Bastion Defense, essentially a massive protective shield that stretches from the Kola Peninsula, home to the Northern Fleet, out into the Barents and Norwegian seas. This makes it tough for foreign militaries to operate while ensuring Russia's submarines and naval forces can move freely. At the heart of it all are Russia's 11 ballistic missile submarines, protected by modernized short, medium, and long-range air defense systems with anti-access, area denial, A2AD capabilities, regular submarine patrols, and long-range aviation missions. With this setup, Russia is pushing threats further out into the Atlantic and securing their Arctic buffer zone. The star of Russia's submarine roster is the Belgorod class, which can deploy the Poseidon, a nuclear-armed stealth torpedo that travels along the sea floor to evade detection. Meanwhile, the Zircon hypersonic missile, capable of reaching 9 times the speed of sound, is designed to bypass NATO defenses and strike with precision. Serial production of the Zircon began in 2022, following successful tests in Arctic waters. So where does Svalbard fit into all this? Svalbard's location is a strategic jackpot. It sits right between the Barents Sea and the North Atlantic, overlooking crucial sea routes. This makes it essential for Russia's military planning, as it plays a pivotal role in Russia's Bastion defense strategy, which stretches from the Kola Peninsula through the Norwegian Sea and reaches the Greenland-Iceland-UK GIUK Gap. And what is the GIUK Gap? It's a critical naval choke point for British and NATO strategy. Historically, it played a key role in blocking Britain's adversaries from accessing the North Atlantic, from German forces during the World Wars to Soviet submarines during the Cold War. During World War II, Britain's decision to occupy Iceland in 1940 under Operation Fork was a direct response to fears that Germany could use the island to control the gap and threaten Allied shipping routes.
Iceland has grown from a land which was only interesting when the weather was peculiar to a military base of first-class importance. When Denmark fell to the Nazi invader, Britain forestalled any possibility of a German attempt to move against her sister nation, Iceland. British troops were dispatched immediately to take over the job of fortifying this land in the north.
By the 1980s, NATO used advanced technologies like the SOSA sonar system to monitor Soviet naval movements, maintaining an edge in anti-submarine warfare. With Russia's expanding submarine capabilities and hybrid warfare tactics, NATO has stepped up its game by re-establishing the US Navy's Second Fleet. The UK, given its proximity to the GIUK Gap, has made the region a priority, planning to expand its frigate fleet from 13 to 18 with new Type 32 vessels. And in September 2022, the Defense Secretary asked the Royal Navy to consider increasing the size of its submarine fleet, while even the Faroe Islands are upgrading their Cold War-era reconnaissance infrastructure. With Russia's powerful submarine fleet in mind, NATO is doubling down on anti-submarine warfare, ASW exercises, and deploying modern subs to maintain dominance in the region. Even with Russia's advanced missile systems and long-range precision strikes, their subs still need to cross this gap to reach the Atlantic. That makes it a critical battleground for NATO's defense strategy. Can they keep the upper hand? Well, perhaps not on their own. Russia's Arctic ambitions are not just about territorial dominance, but also strategic alliances. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov recently emphasized that the Arctic is not the territory of the North Atlantic Alliance, and hinted at potential partnerships with non-Arctic nations like China and India, further complicating the geopolitical landscape. China's been playing it smart, taking advantage of a loophole in the 1920 Svalbard Treaty to set up dual-purpose research centers in the Arctic. Sure, they say it's all about science, but there's definitely a strategic angle here too. Their Yellow River Station in Ny-Ålesund, set up in 2003, is a key part of China's Arctic game plan. Fast forward to 2023, and they've ramped things up, dropping acoustic buoys in the North Sea and sending 3 icebreakers, including the high-tech Xulong 2, into the region. But it's not just China. Russia and China are teaming up, particularly along the Northern Sea route, strengthening their Arctic ambitions. In fact, on August 4, 2023, a joint fleet of 11 Chinese and Russian naval vessels sailed near Alaska's Aleutian Islands, forcing the US Navy to respond.
New military tensions between the US, China, and Russia, with the US Navy sending destroyers to the coast of Alaska last week after nearly a dozen Russian and Chinese warships were spotted patrolling nearby international waters, very nearby.
So, are we looking at a new Arctic power duo? What's the bigger game here? Russia's Arctic ambitions are taking a hit as the war in Ukraine stretches its military thin. Elite Arctic forces, like the 80th, 200th Motorized Rifle Brigade and 61st Infantry Naval Brigade, are reporting heavy casualties, some units losing up to 40% of their personnel. And it's not just the soldiers. Russia's specialized Arctic gear is getting wrecked too. They've lost key equipment like the Tor M2DT air defense systems, GAZ 33-44-20 Alut all-terrain vehicles, and DT-30 Vityaz transport vehicles. The Tor M2DT, designed specifically for those harsh Arctic conditions, has been hit hard by Ukrainian precision strikes, with at least 3 destroyed. And these things aren't cheap. Each one costs around $25 million. So, with their Arctic buildup getting hammered, how will Russia keep up in the race for Arctic dominance?
Well, after more than 2 years of war in Ukraine, speculation is rife on how much military hardware Russia still has at its disposal. More than 2,500 Russian tanks have been lost since the beginning of the conflict.
Even though Russia's taking hits in Ukraine, it's full steam ahead in the Arctic. Last year, Moscow scored a major victory after 2 decades of diplomatic moves and Arctic expeditions. The UN's Commission for the Limitation of the Continental Shelf, CLCS, approved Russia's claim to a whopping 1.7 million square kilometers of the Arctic seabed. But it's not all smooth sailing. Russia still has to hash it out with Canada and Denmark, whose claims overlap before any drilling can kick off. So the Arctic race is far from over. The Arctic may look like a barren wasteland, but rest assured, beneath the frozen tundra, it's teeming with resources. The region is thought to hold about 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and a massive 30% of its untapped natural gas. For Russia, this means around 85 trillion cubic meters of natural gas and 17 billion tons of oil, resources that are critical for its economic future. Russians even planted its flag at the North Pole, staking its claim to these riches. But it's not just the energy reserves that matter. Melting ice is opening up the Northern Sea Route, a shipping lane that could slash travel times between Europe and Asia by up to 2 weeks, giving Russia control over a vital global trade artery. Unlike in Ukraine, where Russia's actions have defied global norms, Moscow has played by the rules in the Arctic, following the UN's Law of the Sea Treaty. Still, the future of Arctic cooperation is on shaky ground. The Arctic Council, which once promoted peaceful dialogue among Arctic nations, has largely suspended its engagement with Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. This raises critical questions. Will Russia continue to follow international law in the Arctic, or will it turn to more aggressive tactics as tensions with the West grow? With billions of dollars in oil and gas at stake and emerging shipping lanes opening due to melting ice, could Svalbard become the spark that ignites a great northern war?